Computer's pretty. Here we go. Awesome. Thanks. Oh, and I see someone else. Hi, Erica. I just happened to names come up. It's like said hi to some people that I know. So it would be, if you can put your video on, it's great. I know that it's nice when folks can see each other, and also recognizing that I can't even tell you the number of times that I've tuned into something when I was on a walk or when I was cleaning up dinner dishes or whatever, and then it's really not the best time to have your camera on. So really appreciate that. Please make sure that you mute your mics, because I've been hearing the feedback, and then it's a little hard for me to get to that right screen to then mute folks. And use the chat and the reactions, because we know that it's not the same as if we were together, and there are ways where we can engage with each other. So please do that. So when we start off in a good way, this is an image from many years ago when we were first engaging in some work in Indigenous knowledge and math. And I really like this one because it was a larger group, and this shows how we would normally start things off when we are able to be face-to-face. And since we can't do that, this is where the chat feature comes in handy. So what I'd like people to do before we get started with the content that I put together is to give a 2-word check-in. So 2 words I know can sometimes be tricky for educators, that they like to say lots of words. And so I'll put in the chat 2 words about where you are today, right now, in this moment. I'll just wait a second for that to populate. Hi, Hannah. I just say hi when I see people's names who I know from from Twitter. And I see you, Lisa Noble. Are you knitting? Thank you. Oh, hi, Judy. Maureen, lots of people I know. I love Twitter for that reason. I mean, Twitter's a love-hate thing for many of us, I think. Oh, I'm sorry that your heart's sore. I know it's been a tough day for many people. I know that in one of the schools in my area, a student lost their life on the weekend. And so, when there's that sort of thing, it's really hard for us to shift into professional learning and to be really excited about it, because, our hearts are with the families. And so I'm glad that you made it tonight. Really appreciate you giving your time, everyone. So I want to start off with some working agreements, and oops, there we go. And these are not mine. These are from Oslam Sensoya and Robin D'Angelo. I think it's really important that before we engage in these conversations, that we set some parameters. And I don't know everyone who's on here. I know some of you, and I know that there will be people here who this might be the first time that you've engaged in a conversation around colonialism and racism in the work that you do in education. And then there are others who are here who I know lead professional learning themselves. And so we have a wide spectrum of people. And the whole point of this is not for people to maybe feel badly because you don't know what you feel you should. You showed up, and that's the first step. That's a really important thing, to show up. And you need to think about, how do you mark yourself on the continuum? So we're all at a different learning place, and what we want to be doing every day is moving forward. So we want to strive for intellectual humility, be willing to grapple with challenging ideas, because I will say some things that for some folks will be challenging. Differentiate between opinion and informed knowledge, which comes from sustained experience, study, and practice. Let go of personal anecdotal evidence and look at broader group level patterns. Recognize how your own social location, your race, your class, your gender, your sexuality informs your perspectives and reactions to your students and those with whom you work. Differentiate between safety and comfort. This one's really, really important for the conversations tonight. And accept discomfort as necessary for social justice growth. A lot of times people confuse, they say that they don't feel safe, but what they really mean is that they don't feel comfortable. And then where I started off, identify where your learning edge is and push it. So I'm going to be talking about language. I'm going to be saying some terms that I know will make people uncomfortable. Colonialism, white supremacy, white fragility, and racism. And these words are all realities in the systems that we're working in our everyday lives. And so what I would like to invite you to do, I think of the work that Brene Brown does, and she says to lean into that discomfort. So think about that. Just don't check out when it gets hard. That's Layla Saad talks about that in her book, Me and White Supremacy, that this work requires commitment. It's not, a personal growth where you're workshop where you're going to necessarily feel really great about yourself and your work at the end. And please stick with it, because you will get there. So I'd like to start by centering things in some of the experiences that I know, and starting with students, because I have to tell you why I do this work. And as an educator, what I've seen in 29 years of education, in particular, noticing moving from teaching in Scarborough when I first started to living and teaching in Guelph, which is a very different demographic. And when our students in our schools write a column, and then there's lots of pushback, that tells me a lot. Being Black in Wellington County means regularly confronting racism. And I love what this former student of our school board said. I hope this makes you uncomfortable, because I was uncomfortable for 18 years. And that's the reality for many of the students who are in our schools and our systems. And when I was working with Indigenous Student Leadership Group, they said the number one thing that they would like non-Indigenous educators to do is to listen. And that one student said it so eloquently. I wish I would have recorded this in a meeting so you could hear her words and not me sharing it, because I won't do it justice. But she said, I don't need to be saved. I don't need someone to take care of me. What I need is for someone to listen. And what I'd love to see is some more fulsome data collection across all of our systems, and as well for Indigenous students. So this is from Towards Race Equity in Education, the Schooling of Black Students in the Greater Toronto Area from 2017. And I would say this is accurate now. Black students are as capable, as competent, as creative, and as determined as all other students. The ways that Black students are constantly misjudged and mistreated by teachers and guidance counselors is an injustice to our community. As educators who seek to enrich an increasingly diverse nation, it is your duty and responsibility to encourage, motivate, challenge, and strengthen Black students like all others. When you begin to see Black students as part of your community, only then will you effectively fulfill your job as an educator. So this is when we listen to students. This is what we get back. So I was talking about my why, and I started with students. So I'm sharing my experience of students, and then also as a Anishinaabe Kwe and a helper, I listened to elders and knowledge keepers, and here are two residential school survivors who I've spent a great deal of time with over the last 7 years. And on the left is Geronimo Henry, who went to the Mohawk Institute for 11 years. And then on the right is Pita Irnik, who is an Inuk elder. And so I asked them to advise, and I listened to them. And I know that many days I feel like this work is hard and I'm tired, and I think, can I keep doing it? And then I think about them, and I think I have not had it hard relative to them. How dare I say that I'm too tired to keep doing it? So they're my why. And then here's my why. This is my my 20-year-old who just texted me in the middle of a meeting earlier today to tell me he was headed to the hospital because he separated his shoulder. He actually thought it was worse than that, so not too bad of news. But I think of him as someone who's 20, and how there was almost no Indigenous content in his education. And when he was talking at one point about his grade 7 teacher talking about Indigenous peoples in history, and another student in his class said, "So where did all of the Indigenous people go?" And the teacher started to answer in the past. And then my son said, "I'm right here." And so I really hope that there will be something different for my grandchildren when I have them someday. And I think of the work and how we can do this work collaboratively. This is why I like to talk about, I have a podcast for folks who maybe don't know called Anti-Racist Educator Reads. And we read different books go back and forth between Indigenous and Black authors. And I think this is how we're going to change the future, is by not being separated, because often I find that's what happens by colonial powers separate us and have us in competition with one another instead of collaborating and working together. We know that's a strategy. And then lest we think that what I'm talking about are things of the past. Anyone I think who's on social media would know about both of these cases. One of them was a couple of weeks ago, and the other was last week. And so this tells me that we still have a great deal of work to do. So what I want you to think about is, what's your why? Why do you want to engage in this work? Why are you already engaging in this work? Maybe for some of you who are just starting, why did you sign up for this workshop? As I mentioned, everyone who's here has been doing and engaging this work in a different way for a different length of time. And so what I want to do is send you out into a breakout group, but a really, really short period of time. And I know, again, this is funny. When I do this, I teach an additional qualification on Indigenous education. And it's really funny because I always send people out into breakouts and they get 2 minutes. And I think educators are not really good at 2 minutes. And so I'm just going to go into this. Again, we're going to see how this goes because I've never done this before on Zoom. I'm assuming it's going to be easy. So there's, yeah, I'm going to try to have people just with a partner, because then 38, then that's the easiest way, I think. Someone might be in a group of 3. So you're just going to talk about, why are you here? So, and why is this work important to you? And I'm just going to give you 4 minutes. So if you could try to make sure that each person gets 2 minutes, that would be great. Oops. There we go. Here we go. Thanks for coming.
I was like getting to hear your voice, but also see your face at the same time. Like, wow, this is
that
so
never happens, eh?
Right.
Now you see, oh my gosh, look how tired she looks. I'm like going, she's tired, because I was doing a trustee presentation with a treaty partner until 6:45, and then
Literally
like,
right before.
and then like pop right over. I didn't even have time to make tea.
Oh no. I was thinking about that. I thought, like, all the time, especially this week in particular, I just, like, my heart was thinking about you and a lot of our Indigenous leads who are just overworked to the point of exhaustion, beyond
Yeah.
exhaustion. So
Yeah. But
yeah.
then you see my why, right? So you
Yeah.
see like, yeah. So what about your why?
I I think about it every day. Just the faces of my students. When I look at them and I think about my own experience in school and the encounters that I had and the harm that was done in school, I don't want that to be um, recreated or to happen again to them. So I'm constantly trying to think of ways that I can create something different so they don't have to experience what we experienced in school, and school can be a place where they can thrive and be healthy and learn and not have to compromise who they are, and really, I think, diminish themselves in order to kind of get through school, as opposed to education being a chance for them to flourish. So
Mhm.
yeah, it makes me really sad. I was just thinking about it last week. I was reading this article about celebrations and traditions in school, and I mean, I was telling somebody that it makes me really upset when I see a lot of kids who don't get to have their traditions or celebrations or their personhood or anything honored or celebrated in school ever. Like going through school from kindergarten to grade 12 and never having your
Mhm.
traditions spoken about or honored. I was like, doesn't that I bring a bell in anyone's mind? And they're like, I never paid attention to it. I'm like, because you're not really centering anybody but yourself. But
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Mafuza. Welcome. We're just in breakout rooms, and Hannah's just stayed here with me because I don't understand how the Zoom worked to send you someone in a breakout room by themselves. But welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm kind of late.
That's
Well,
okay. No worries. We just got started, and I was just asking people, why do they engage in this work of, anti-racism, anti-colonialism?
Okay. I apologize for interrupting the conversation then.
No, no, no. Would you like to, I was saying that because I was wondering in the last 1 minute that we have, if you had anything you wanted to add, and don't worry if you don't, because, it's nothing like showing up and popping in and then all of a sudden getting put on the spot.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I just, I guess it has, for me, it's also very, I don't know, Hannah, I didn't hear everything that you were saying, but just my lived experience growing up, um, not seeing yourself in the school space and trying to figure out how to navigate it, and being like the first one from your family to go through the educational system or just anything here was challenging, and then not feeling like you belong added another dimension. So I just want to make sure that my students don't feel that way.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. I'm just gonna close all those rooms now. And my timer, I didn't realize how it worked. Close in a minute. Doesn't close it automatically. I guess that's kind of rude then when people end up getting closed automatically. I'm gonna stop sharing for a second and then come back to it. Oh, everyone's starting to come back now. Lisa, I can't believe you're not knitting.
I am trying to let people into Edu Knit Night on one screen.
Oh, that's
while
right.
I'm learning
It's your
with
knitting
you
night.
at the same time. It's okay. They all know I'm doing this with you. It's knit night, but I'm doing this with you, and I just open the room and everybody can talk and knit. It's all
Okay.
good.
Welcome back, everyone. I think everyone's coming back. Okay, so what I wanted to do was, this is a strategy that I really like that I got from Sandra Herbst, if any of you have ever worked with Sandra Herbst before. And that's that she gives people an opportunity to talk in a small group with one person or maybe two. And then when we come back to the group, that one or two people can share what was in the conversation. So are there one or two volunteers who would like to just briefly talk about the conversation that you had. You can just put your hand up or unmute yourself and go ahead. Oh, I see some hands up now. Okay, I see Mary Beth. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. So I met Erica in my breakout room. She is a consultant in the Niagara board and is a very busy mom with 2 under 2. And we talked a lot about sort of our responsibility as educators, about culturally responsive texts, and about that idea that we're not just looking to lead, for example, with peers, but also with students, and kind of creating those conversations and those environments where students feel like they're in a place where they can learn.
Thanks so much. One other person?
I'll jump in. I was with Liz in the breakout rooms, and Liz is coming back from a year away from the classroom and is really feeling like this is a great place and a great way for her to do some catching up, because she feels like there's been professional development in between that she's missed out on, and is looking to fill in some of those gaps and continue to help her with new learning.
Thanks, Lisa. And I see, is it Eniel? Could you correct me, please? On your
Hi, Belinda. It's Eniel.
Eniel, okay.
Yes.
Eniel. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I spoke with Sarah, who is an educator in the Waterloo area elementary panel, and we talked about sort of two reasons. One, maybe there's a personal why, and then there is sort of a professional why as well. One for our own growth and understanding as we live in this sort of colonial sort of narrative, and understanding that, at least for some, it may not have been part of the institutional education system that we were brought up with, and therefore it's been a lot of self-learning, and also understanding that it's not a monolith, and it's not sort of a one construct, and so the learning and the conversation is continuous. And then how that applies to sort of the professional space, in the sense that, you know, it was mentioned already in terms of the cultural relevance, but also the historical response to sort of the milieu in which we're living, and the harm that kind of perpetuates on our young learners, and having the opportunity to start that education and understanding and capacity building at an early stage.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Appreciate that. So I'm going to back into slide deck. I think this is the right one. Okay, there we go. All right, back in business. Oops, over here. Or not. Oh, there it is. Okay, so a few definitions for you that I think it's important that we work through, so we're clear on what language is. And again, I know that some of you, this is going to be a review, so I do apologize for that, but I really feel like we need to be using some common language to get started. So this is the language that we're using in our policy document in the board. We're one of only a couple of boards in the province that have an Indigenous education policy, and that just came into effect in our district last year in May. So colonialism, the historical practice of expansion into territories already inhabited by Indigenous peoples for the purposes of acquiring new lands and resources. This expansion is rooted in the violent suppression of Indigenous peoples' governance, legal, social, and cultural structures. Colonialism attempts to force Indigenous peoples to accept and integrate into institutions that are designed to force them to conform within the structure of the colonial state. So we want to be really clear that we understand, you know, what are we talking about? when we're using this language, and to be on a common ground. So I would suggest whenever you're doing any sort of work that has places where people may get uncomfortable, like you're talking about racism or colonialism, that you clearly define the terms to begin with. And so I'm giving you the definitions that we're using. You may use some that are a little different. And just a last comment on this one, that contrary to Stephen Harper's address to the G20 summit in 2009, Canada does indeed have a history of colonialism and a very current reality of that as well. So this is the part of the learning that I think is important for folks to consider. How are you understanding the history of this land and what is now known as Canada? And so what is the historical knowledge and understanding you have that includes from Indigenous lens? And let me tell you that I have a master's degree in Canadian history, and at no time did I have any Indigenous history courses. And so I have an undergraduate degree in history and then a master's in history. I had no idea who I was from my research that I did. I did one course, but it was self-directed, so I really don't think that counts. So I tell you this so you understand that if I had no knowledge with being Anishinaabe and having a master's degree in history, then I understand that many of you will not. And that you want to go back to a starting point around with the papal bulls. So there's Dum Diversis, which gives the full and free power to invade, conquer, fight, and subjugate, take all lands and possessions, and keep people in perpetual servitude, specifically talking about Indigenous peoples. So that's 1452. And then the doctrine of discovery, which most of you, I think, would know, which gave the church the spiritual, political, and legal justification for seizure of lands that's not inhabited by Christians, used by the European monarchies beginning the mid-15th century. Then we have starting with the missionization on these lands in the 1600s, which many of us as Indigenous people still feel very closely today. When we look at our own communities, that I didn't grow up with traditional teachings. I grew up as a Catholic, and that was what my family were all Catholics, or some other folks who are born again in the communities, but nobody was following traditional spiritual practices. And so that's that missionization from the 1600s carrying forward to today. We have Gradual Civilization Act of 1857. So even before Canada was the nation that it's called now, there were an act put together about civilizing Indigenous peoples. Then residential schools, which I feel confident that everyone here knows about that. Certainly at least since the 215 were found in May of this year. Indian Act in 1876, so shortly after Canada becomes a country. Then we have the Indian Act, which now controls everything to do with anyone who is identified as an Indian. And that's a language that, while for the most part, I wouldn't recommend using it, it still is definitely in group talk. And as my dad always says, I have a card that says that's what I am. And so that is that's the language I'm going to use. We have people being moved to reserves, which you understand about land grabs there. If you know anything about the BNA Act, what it says in it is that the federal government has jurisdiction over Indians and lands reserved for Indians. And so what happens with the BNA Act that's really quite fascinating is that the division of powers between federal and provincial happens, is one of the key points. And the Indians, as were referenced at the time, become part of the federal responsibility, and resources become part of provincial. So I'll let you think about, why that might happen. And that no Indigenous peoples were consulted in this. And we have everything from the 60s scoop and millennial scoop and forced sterilization. That's, 2 minutes of 500 years of colonial history here. This is a book, is the last book that I just most recently did in a podcast, and I love this book. I think everyone who lives in this country should read this book, Settler Identity and Colonialism in 21st Century Canada. I'll let you just read. Think about what you know about the history of these lands and how that maybe fits into this national mythology that doesn't sound quite the same as the really quick historical timeline that I just shared with you. We have to think about settlement as like the word that they use in the book is invasion, that it's not a single event, but it's an invasion over time. And the important thing about thinking about settlers is that they never leave. And so here we are today in very much impacted by settler colonialism. And at the end of this book, Emma Battelle talks about, I love the very end where she talks about like a reclamation of the word settler. We say settler because it's a place from which we can determine how we live on these lands. We say settler to signal we're ready to do the work. We say settler because we believe ethical and exciting decolonial futures are possible. We say settler because we have seen the identification shake how people feel about themselves and their belonging, and how it has been the start of decolonizing awareness and action. We say settler because it is who we are. We say settler because it is not everything we could be. So I love this, highly, highly recommend taking a look at this book. And to help you grapple, many of you, maybe might not be the identity of all of you, but most educators in Ontario are settlers. And so coming to terms with that. So, we cannot build an anti-colonial practice if we don't have a clear understanding of colonialism, settler colonialism, the way it impacts us, and the roles that we play as well. So it's really important that we understand that. And then I don't want to speak out of line because I'm not Black, I'm Anishinaabe. I would like to share a little bit of with the work of Natasha Henry, which I would assume everyone in Ontario knows who she is. And she has a great website teaching African Canadian history, where you can get lots and lots of information that will help you teach that true history. Because in a similar way that you may not know the true history for Indigenous peoples, you likely also do not know the same true history for Black folks here. And so what she does on this link on her blog post is that she goes through each of the grades of the curriculum and highlights a couple of places where there's entry points for you. So whether you're teaching, grade 3 and you're going to talk about Black loyalists and Blacks in the War of 1812, to grade 5, laws that affected Afro-Canadians, 1793 Act to limit slavery and the 1833 Slavery Abolition Act, grade 6, Underground Railroad, grade 7, enslavement and resistance, grade 8, Black migration and the KKK, African diaspora, food security and race, environmental racism, goes on and on. She's like really, really, please go to her website to get that fulsome history that you may not know. I know some of you would know, but others who don't, please go to a reliable source. Don't just use Google or like your search engine, whatever your search engine is, to find reliable sources. Again, going back to definitions, anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism. So these are on the Ontario government site. So you might want to screenshot them before they disappear. Some people, if you teach de-streaming, you know what I'm talking about with how the de-streaming curriculum said one thing and I was so excited. and then all of a sudden it said something different. So for now, I would recommend they've done a wonderful job at clearly defining many anti-racism terms that give people a good starting point on being clear. Anti-Black racism, the prejudice, attitudes, beliefs, stereotyping, discrimination directed at people of African descent and rooted in their unique history and experience of enslavement and its legacy. And then it explains it further. Anti-Indigenous racism is the ongoing race-based discrimination, negative stereotyping, and injustice experienced by Indigenous peoples within Canada. It includes ideas and practices that establish, maintain, perpetuate power imbalances, and you can see the rest of that there. I really do use that website. It's really helpful. And so, as I said, lest we think these are things of the past, I'm coming back here to anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, right here, right in schools, and within the last couple of weeks. And I imagine that many of you have your own stories or experiences or things that you've seen or things that you've heard. So it's really important that we are engaging in these conversations. And so what I'd like to do is I'm going to send you into some breakouts again. And again, it's going to be really, really fast. And now I know that it takes a minute to pull you back. I'm going to pull you back even faster. How do colonialism, racism, and oppression play out in your practice, your school, the system? So like something that you're aware of and maybe something you never thought about before now. But now that I've given you these clear definitions, you can think about it. And I'm going to give you even a little bit less time just because I have some things that I want to make sure that we get to. And I'm going to send you out into those breakout rooms for only 3 minutes this time. And so if you could just be mindful that both of you get a chance to have a conversation. We just don't have much time. It's like, and it goes flying. So if I could just have one person and someone who didn't speak already, just share a little tiny bit about your conversation. And I hope people use this strategy when you're bringing people together because I think it's effective. Just one person who would share a little bit.
I can share a little bit.
Thank you.
Amy and I, we text chatted because her computer died and she's on her phone, and it's a good demonstration of doing what we need to do to be able to learn and to come to these sessions. But it just seems like there's the system reform or dismantling of the system is happening at such a glacial pace because there's so much work that needs to be done. It seems like in many cases we're just scratching the surface with very few racialized leaders in place. It's, you know, to me, it just seems like it's going to take a long time for there to become enough racialized people in education to be promoted into positions of power for differences to really be felt.
Thank you, Adam. I love that you use the word glacial because that's how I feel sometimes. But at the same time, you know, I have definitely seen movement forward, just not at the pace that I'd like. And I'm going to go back here to, this is the right one. You should pop over there now. Yes, you there. Okay. So think about this. I know that you haven't had time to really digest it in our conversations here. So we've talked about what colonialism is and anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism. So then we've talked about like, what is anti-racism? So what is this work that we need to be doing? And it's very much a process. It's not the same way that we talked about how colonialism is not an event. So too is the anti-racism work we do is not an event, that it's a process. And what we're doing is looking at this. How are we identifying? How are we removing, preventing, mitigating? So this is all, and this is again from that same website. So we need to be doing all of this work very consciously. I know that lots of people quote Kendi, and I have too. And it's important that we go, where did that source come from about things not being neutral? And that's Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And what I love about this book, a bit more academic, is that he says that the great humanistic task of the oppressed is to free themselves, and so to free their oppressors. And I can think of the most beautiful example of that is with residential school survivors, and that they're always giving and giving and giving because they are the ones who are, forgiving those who put them in that situation, because it's important for them to be, for all of us to be free and moving forward. And so I'm just looking at the time here. So this was in the blurb that went out to you. How does knowing our past impact our present and our future actions? This is just till 8, right, Dean? Could you convert? Thank you. I see your head. Okay, thanks. I was going 8 o'clock. An hour is never enough. So this is where we're going to start the next time. So what I would like to invite you to do is to think about what is something that you could commit to reading or watching or listening or seeking out. And for the next session, we're going to start straight away with talking about this question. How does knowing our past impact our present and our future actions? So if you kind of could chew on that for the week. And so we'll come back and start off with that question.